Morning. Been working on a paper. Been working on a book, as you know, on Marianne Williamson for a couple of years now, and following her work since at least the early 1990s. This morning, on a section I was working on in this paper on her educational political philosophy, particularly as an educator and a leadership thinker, theorist, I'm really interested in how leaders try to promote, their work, their views, and what I would call, fearlessness leadership. And she is certainly moving in those directions for me. That said, you could read a lot of my work online about her. I've written many publications. I've also done several videos on my YouTube channel. This morning, I want to share a part of her speech, the Marianne 2020 announcement on January 29, 2019, when she decided to run as leader for the Democratic Party, of which eventually could be, if she would have won, offering to be president of the United States. And to challenge Donald Trump in that election would have been, to me, a battle royale of an archetypal historical kind. So this little clip I'm going to show you this morning of that speech, of her announcement, I think is one of the great speeches of American history and way beyond American. I'm not a big Americanist myself like she is, but I think it has international scope. And I know she has an international and global world perspective. She is a futurist, evolutionist, developmentalist thinker. And to me, one of the most advanced thinkers in politics today, beyond a doubt, in my mind. And this little clip, I just think is amazing. Again, this whole speech, I'm just going to show a short section. So let me go up to the screen share and get on with it.
Something began to change in this country. There was a man named Milton Friedman and the Chicago boys out of Chicago School of University of Chicago, I think, economics, and it was this economic theory. And it began to have devastating effects in our country. Because when I was growing up, you see, it was understood that a corporation had more than just fiduciary financial responsibility to its stockholders. It was understood that a corporation also had a moral and an ethical responsibility to its workers and to the community and to the environment. But something began to change when the entire society began to be propagandized about this trickle-down economics. And the idea, you see, was that all a corporation should have to do is to answer to the fiduciary interests of its stockholders. Now, the idea of there being more stakeholders than just the stockholders means a lot of people have a stake in this. The environment has a stake in it, the community has a stake in it, the workers have a stake in it. But no, we were all told, as long as market forces, unfettered market forces, as long as market forces untethered to any kind of ethical consideration, as long as short-term profit maximization for these huge multinational corporations take precedence, that will be good, you see, because then they'll get richer and then the money will trickle down to everyone else. This has been going on since the 1980s. And it has created something devastating in our society. A person who has no remorse, a person who has no conscience, a person who has no ethics, a person who has no compassion is a sociopath. And an economic order which does not have a conscience, which does not have ethics, which does not have compassion, and which justifies its amorality by saying, well, all that our responsibility is to accrue money for this small group of people who are our stockholders, that is a sociopathic economic system. And that sociopathic economic system has become an economic tyranny in the United States of America. We're now living in a time where huge corporate conglomerates, whether it's oil companies, fossil fuel companies, chemical companies, agribusiness, big pharma, health insurance companies, military industrial complex. Our government has become a system of legalized bribery. especially since the Citizens United case, where the nefarious influence of money is so great that our government now acts mainly as a handmaiden to these corporate forces. Our own government does more to advocate for the short-term profit maximization of the huge corporate conglomerates than it does to advocate for the people of the United States, to even care about the people of the world or the planet on which we live. This is perilous. This is dangerous. It is perilous to our democracy, and possibly, if we are not careful, it will be perilous to the survivability of the human race. This is not democracy. As Louis Brandeis, late Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said, you can have large amounts of wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, or you can have democracy. You cannot have both. Our country was founded on the idea that all men are created equal. Our country was founded on the idea that God gave inalienable rights to life and to liberty and to the pursuit of happiness to all men. And the governments were instituted among men to secure those rights. And Lincoln came along later and said that this is to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But those principles have to be more than just inscribed on marble walls. They have to be more than just written on parchment. They have to live inside our hearts, or they have no moral force. What has happened in this country is that huge forces, who don't really wish us ill, they just find democracy inconvenient to their financial purposes. They have now instigated passive and active assaults on our democracy. There has been a massive theft from the public treasury, money that has been systematically removed into the hands of the very few, into the hands of that 1% of 1%. While this country does not have universal health care, while we do not have a $15 an hour minimum wage, while there are millions and millions and millions of people living in chronic economic despair, millions of Americans who are going, what am I going to do if I get sick? What am I going to do if one of my kids gets sick? What am I going to do? How am I going to pay for my kids to go to college? What am I going to do? How am I going to pay for these college loans? I have seen this despair. I have seen it growing. I travel around this country. That is what I do. And I've seen it over and over and over. And I'll tell you something. A lot of people were so surprised by the election of Donald Trump. I was shocked, but I was not surprised. And any political establishment on left or right that was gobsmacked by Donald Trump was only because they weren't looking at what's most important, because they should have seen all that economic despair. They should have realized it was there. And so much of that economic despair was there that there was going to be a cry of populist despair. It was going to be an authoritarian populism, or it was going to be a progressive populism, but it was going to come up from the bottom of things. Now, in this country, we have a history. We have a history of pushing back against tyranny. We have a history of pushing back. We had slavery in this country, but then we had the abolitionist movement. We had the suppression of women in this country, but then we had two waves of feminism, and we had the birth of the suffragette movement. We had institutionalized white supremacy and segregation, but then we had the civil rights movement. We had child labor laws, and we had antitrust laws, and we had unions. What is it with this generation? It is time for us to rise up.
Well, it is time for fearlessness to rise up against fear-based tyranny and all the other forms of oppression that she didn't mention. But there is no leader in politics today that I have known of or seen historically in my studies who, like Marianne Williamson, puts fear and love, raises them right to the surface as frontal in terms of the struggle of the oppressed, struggle of us as humans, all of us, in our search for freedom, for goodness, truth, beauty, and the impact that fear will have if we continue to operate under fear's empire. And that, to me, is why I write, think, teach about Marianne Williamson's work, help to try and interpret it better, make it maybe easier for people, write these papers, do videos, and have a look at my new book coming out if you can as well, The Marianne Williamson Presidential Phenomenon. But all of those things and the community that she wants to build to improve citizen education so that we can be much more conscious and sharp and critical about everything our political leaders do and that we do that colludes with political leadership. So I'm not left, right, center in that sense. I'm much more interested in the deeper problem as she is, even though she would come across to be clearly seen as a Democrat leftist. I can tell you, if you spend any time with her work and her thought, um, those political parties and divisions are very arbitrary to her. She is after something much grander vision. So I encourage you to watch that speech. I'll put a link to the whole speech below in this clip. Thanks for watching today. Um, they say, stay smart out there.